today. I apologize for my new computer woes of last Monday, but hopefully you'll be able to see and hear the program tonight. So what is pollination? Well, it's the way that the pollen a plant makes finds its way to other plants or the same plant to complete pollination. The pollinators or wind or water will help the pollen grains found on the anthers of a plant make it into the ovule of the same flower or another flower. And it's the male sperm nucleus of a pollen grain uniting with the female egg inside the ovule that yields a seed when pollination is successful. That's about as scientific as we're going to get today. Who is doing all this pollinating? Well, here's a list. So I found this pie chart about wildflower pollination, giving a more realistic idea of what the proportions are of those various pollinators and who's doing all the pollinating. As you can see, bumblebees and wild bees are the biggest promoters of pollination. Nearly 3/4 of all the plants on Earth need animal help to pollinate. The color, the fragrance, or the nectar attracts the pollinators. Experts suggest that planting in groups is the best way to catch the attention of moving pollinators. They'll bring them to your garden and they'll keep them in your garden. Why is that important? Well, for work animals, meat and dairy animals to eat, pollination needs to happen. Food for wildlife is produced, reproduction of landscape plants will happen, and humans will have food to eat. And I'm going to talk about a bunch of plants, but I'm not going to mention every plant by name, but you'll see that I have put the common name, the botanical name, and noted if the plant is a native. Natives are encouraged because most of our native pollinators have co-evolved with these plants. Native plants also are more likely to be successful in the garden because they have adapted to our climates, irrespective of climate change, but they know our soils, they know our weather, and they will likely be shining stars in your garden. Planting for pollinators, you need plants from late in the winter to all the way through fall. And I'll be showing you plants and trying to mention when things bloom so that you'll have a good idea of what to expect. So you've said to yourself, I don't have room for this. I don't have sun for this. Well, I encourage you to be a little creative. I came up with this idea of a green fence when I needed privacy from my next door neighbor, but it also gives you a chance to try out some plants that you aren't sure exactly what the color is going to be or where you want to put it. It also gives you a chance to play with annuals without having to do a whole lot of digging in the flower bed or making room for annuals. And annuals are easy, and I find them irresistible. Among the pollinators in our gardens that you might not even have realized are pollinators, or are they bees, are sweat bees. They're everywhere, every continent, over 400 species in the US and Canada. And whether you're looking at a black, solid black insect or shiny metallic green one, whether it's 1/10 of an inch, the size of a gnat, or up to a 1/2 inch, these are important pollinators. They do seem to be attracted to sweat, so in the warmer months, you may see more of them coming to get sweat from you or your clothes. And it's not a miserable sting, but they will sting you if they get caught in the fold of your arm, or I've had a sting on my neck. It won't kill you, but you'll notice it. On the other end of the spectrum for size of pollinators are bumblebees. These are large pollen grains on this bumblebee, but you can see that even small pollen grains, notice the orange on the legs of this bumblebee. Bumblebees are important pollinators. Over 450 species of other bees, but 18 species of bumblebees alone in Virginia. Pretty amazing. The plant shown here is New York ironweed, which can get to be 8 to 10 feet tall. In my garden, it doesn't get quite that large, but some of the native plants that do get very tall can be sheared off early in the spring before they set flower heads, so that they'll only get to be 3 to 4 feet tall. There are ways to garden around the native species. One of our most populous bees in Hampton Roads is the mason bee. You've probably heard about them in recent years. A lot of people are interested in bringing them to the yard because they are such important pollinators. You can make a native bee house, which will draw them into the yard and help them stay in the yard to help pollinate your garden plants. A friend made this bee house. They still call it a mason bee house, but while you see on the left here, this is early in the morning when she put it out, and this is a mason bee. And on the right, by the end of the day, you can see that there was quite a lot of activity in her mason bee house. But this particular cell and some of the others where you see leaf parts, those are made by leaf cutter bees, and I'll tell you about them in just a sec. If you don't want to be creative or feel your carpenter skills would be tested, there are commercially available some designer type bee houses that would be worth including in your garden to help bring in and keep the pollinators in your yard. Now here's that leafcutter bee. Here's seen on Stokes asters, just a lovely native plant. The leafcutter bee is always evident in my yard when I look at the heart-shaped leaves of my redbud tree. They cut out a circle of leaf edge to put with between the egg cells in the bee house where they've been laying their eggs. It separates their egg cells. And I think that's all I wanted to tell you about that. Here is the honeybee. Beautiful honeybees. See how they do have the pollen carrying egg sacs on their legs? Now, this is on a native aster, which is often a late summer or early fall blooming plant. Honeybees aren't native, as you probably know. In this picture, you can see they're bringing food back to the hive. Pollen provides protein, nectars, carbohydrates. So How'd they get here? They came over with the settlers in the 1600s. By 1850, honeybees had made it to California, and they are the only bee to produce food for humans. I am not a beekeeper. I am a beekeeper's wife and gardener, but it is a fascinating thing to observe when honey is being collected from a beehive. The beekeeper selects a frame. The cells of honey are capped with with beeswax, and there's a process that is fun to watch. If you're ever interested, be in touch with a beekeeper or message me, and I'll let you contact my husband. The thing I learned about beekeeping is that I don't want to do it. I loved the gardening aspect, and I found a lot of good information in this book. The author is further up north. He's in Delaware and did his research in Delaware and New Jersey, I believe. And he has rated a bunch of different natives and non-native plants for their pollen and nectar values and their bloom times. So bloom times aren't helpful for us being this far south, but seeing a variety of plants and which are considered most useful for pollen and nectar was interesting and helped me include more plants for the honeybees into my pollinator garden. One of my favorite plants and a pollinator favorite is blue mist flower. It stays low, about knee high, reliably perennial, stays in bloom a long time. And it was the first opportunity I had had to see this particular moth species, and needed a lot of help because I didn't realize it was a moth. But blue mist flower is a great native to incorporate in your garden. The pollinators get so into their work that this picture, I couldn't even identify which native bee it was. Here seen on a Rudbeckia. This is Goldstern. Any of the Rudbeckias are good. Your common names will be black-eyed Susan or brown-eyed Susan, but any of the Rudbeckias are pollinator garden worthy. Here on Cosmos, you'll see I think it's a sweat bee. Yeah, it is. Annuals are attractive too. Cosmos is a wonderful one. If you're only going to plant one kind of plant in your garden, make it a zinnia. And any of the older varieties, rather than the new latest thing that has been altered to change color or growth pattern, or the older varieties tend to have more attraction to the pollinators. They're more nectar rich or more pollen available. Whether it's a native or a non-native, look for older varieties. Even the flies are helping to pollinate. Solidago, any of the Solidago species, and there are native and non-native, but any of the goldenrods will be great for your garden. Most are late season bloomers. One of my favorite resources is anything by Heather Holm. Here is a book that will give you an amazing amount of information, lists, plant lists, help to identify different insects. But Heather Holm, whether it's a YouTube available lecture or a lecture that the master gardeners have been able to arrange, or any of her books. Keep in mind, most of these books are available through the public library. Keep an eye out for this book. It's worth the investment if you have to buy it. Somebody asked me one time whether the pollinators got in each other's way. Well, I've never seen really much antagonism. They seem to get along just fine. They're very busy doing what they're doing. Just their landing on a flower may startle the movement of somebody who was there first, but they don't seem to be attacking each other to get them out of the way. You can see on the underwing of this pipevine swallowtail that while butterflies are in general considered not as important a pollinator, they do carry pollen. Here you can see the orange small pollen grains that this butterfly has picked up while going into nectar. Monarchs, the poster children of endangered species, they help to pollinate the milkweeds. Planting any milkweed in your garden is a way to help the monarch populations regroup and hopefully survive. The tuberosa pictured here is not the favorite milkweed in my yard. Just as a piece of trivia, I imagine most of you know by now that these small spots on the lower wing of a monarch indicate that it's a male. Those spots are actually scent glands where the male monarch can put off his fragrance to draw the females hither. And it's how they find each other. He will often be lurking around a milkweed patch or an area in your garden where there's milkweed. Here's pictured non-native milkweed. And I wanted to show you a picture with the aphids. These are milkweed aphids. Anytime you plant milkweed, you're going to see some other milkweed insects other than the monarchs. And that's where I get on my soapbox to tell you, be sure to read labels when you're buying your plants. This picture is a few years old. You can tell by the price of this milkweed plant. But notice that along with mentioning that it's a tropical milkweed, meaning it's not a Hampton Roads native, you will see that there is a tag. It's a little blurry because at the time my cell phone camera was subpar, but it proudly lets you know that it's protected from problematic insects like aphids, whiteflies, beetles, and mealybugs. And it says, and other unwanted pests by neonicotinoids. Now, you've probably heard that word, but let me tell you more about it. Neonicotinoids are a class of insecticide. It is one that is considered systemic. It's applied to the soil or the plant and is drawn into the roots, the stems, the leaves, the flowers, the pollen, and the nectar, and makes the plant virtually poisonous to anybody who visits it. In general, avoid any kind of chemical additives to your garden, but especially systemic chemical pesticides. So what do? Pictured, you'll see a helpful insect. Ladybugs will come and eat your aphids. Another milkweed plant you'll see are the milkweed tussock moths. And there are two types of beetles. So what can you do? You can spray with insecticidal soap. You can hit your plant with a strong stream of water to knock the aphids off. You can remove them manually, which was my method to survive my daughter's teenage years. I would put a glove on and go out and squish those little suckers by hand, and it kept me from attacking my daughter. I attacked aphids. Or you can do nothing at all. You can wait for a rain shower. You can let nature take its course. The milkweed aphids are not fatal to the plant. They're not going to bother the caterpillars or the butterflies enough to make them not use the plant for the purpose you planted it for. One of my absolute favorite plants, it's not native, but this is hummingbird plant. It's attractive to larger butterflies. It's reliably perennial. It has an interesting leaf, soft, fuzzy leaf, reminiscent of the lamb's ear plant leaves. And it'll bring your hummers in, guaranteed. Things with tubular flowers are going to help you bring hummingbirds to your yard. I love this plant. I am proud to say that I donated the plant for NBG to propagate, and they have used it in their gardens. This fabulous picture shows coral honeysuckle. It is, without a doubt, the longest blooming, excuse me, pollinator plant that you can add to your garden. Here's what mine looks like in January and February. And here's what it'll look like June through September. It's a fabulous plant, brings in the hummers. It also serves as host plant for a clear-wing moth. I think somewhere in the program I've got a picture to show you of one of those. And the dedicated smaller native bees will be trying to get into those tubes too. I did put it in. Brazilian verbena is the plant. Excuse me. Whether you call it Brazilian verbena or verbena on a stick, this is a long, long blooming addition to your garden. It's problem-free as far as I'm concerned. I've never had any issues with it. And you can see that this snowberry clearwing enjoys nectaring on it. You might confuse this day-flying moth with a hummingbird because of the rapid fluttering of the wings when it is nectaring. But as opposed to a hummingbird, it can't fly in reverse. And it just flies like an insect. Phloxes, whether the early blooming ones shown on the left or a fall blooming phlox on the right, are wonderful garden plants. They have varying bloom times. Many are fragrant, and you have great colors to choose from. Lovely, lovely addition to your garden. I apologize for my cough. The mountain mints, and there are several that'll grow in Hampton Roads, are the greatest attractor of pollinators in our yard. It is a mint, but it is not as aggressive as some of the culinary mints. I'm sorry. Let's see if that helps. It's not a gorgeous flowering plant, but it is an amazing array of sort of flat top flowers. And it's fun to see how many different types of pollinators you can see when it is midsummer. I recommend this plant. Ladybugs will feed on soft-bodied insects. Here, this is a daisy. Always a good idea to include daisies as they are early, mid, and late season blooming. Ants as pollinators. There are billions of ants out there to help pollinate your flowers. Cardinal flower is a great attractor for hummingbirds and larger butterflies. Again, the tubular flower is the attraction. This one can be a little fussy. You'll find it growing wild at Great Dismal Swamp if you ever explore some of the canal roads. You'll find one glowing in the sunlight in the middle of a dark area of woods, but they're kind of fussy for establishing roots. They will self-propagate if there's not too much mulch on the ground. Beautiful plant. I have better luck with the blue lobelias. One of my favorite, these are my favorite two discoveries of the last few years, just because of their amazing appearance. The Spigelia marylandica, another tubular flower attracting butterflies and pollinators. Common name is Indian pink, which I have yet to figure out. Other than that, the roots in the other common name, woodland pink root, it might be that, but I hadn't noticed any particular pinkness to the roots. This Erigeron fleabane, this particular variety was discovered in Hampton Roads on the Lynnhaven River. And it spreads, it makes a nice low ground cover, early spring bloomer, where the Spigelia, where the woodland pink, Indian pink, is a summer bloomer. Bats are pollinators. Bats in the garden are always good. This is not a species we have locally. Their ability to eat mosquitoes makes them highly desirable. I have yet to attract them with my bat box. There's a face only a mother could love, but bats are to be encouraged, if nothing else, to control some of the mosquitoes and night flying insects. For ideas on ways to design your garden, I found this living landscape invaluable. I discovered some new plants by looking through this book, but also got some ideas for ways to incorporate this variety of plants into a working landscape. These are just amazing pollinator attractors. The swamp sunflower is one that will get very tall, but you control it by whacking it off in spring before the flower heads set. And the oxeye sunflower doesn't get as tall, but is also a wonderful attractor. Here you see a native bee on coneflower. Any of the echinaceas, there are native varieties of coneflower. There are cultivars. I do have better luck with the older varieties and the cultivars than I do with the hybrids. A lot of the hybrids were created to enhance color or flower shape. And I have not found them as reliably perennial. Think about using an older variety like Echinacea purpurea or Magnus, Magnus, Magnus. Piloni glabra is one of those flowers that lets you know that if there's nectar, they will go for it. This guy is definitely intent on getting to the food part of this flower. Not in our area, but up further north is a butterfly, an endangered butterfly, Baltimore checker spot, that uses the chelone as a host plant. Even beetles are to be encouraged. Garlic chives, one of those plants that people either love or hate, is one of the busiest pollinator plants in our garden. It wanders around, the birds will take it to places you never thought you never planted, but I like it. You can weed it out if you have too much, but it is a good, reliable pollinator feeding source. Favorite plants is the native crossvine. In this picture, just over here, is where the plant was originally planted, and I put up a lattice support. It overtook the lattice support, and it is now completely covering the roof of my garden shed, all, 14 feet of it. And in the spring, it's a little early yet for it, but when it is in bloom, there is a bumblebee or a native bee of some sort in just about every bloom. And I'm telling you, the roof of my shed buzzes. It's great, aside from being pretty. Just a wonderful native, and someday I hope to learn how to propagate it and be successful. Lately, I read an article about spicebush being a native alternative to forsythia. Not only would it serve that purpose, it is an early spring bloomer. Mine is just about finished now. It is also the host plant for the beautiful spicebush swallowtail butterfly. If you see the caterpillar on it, or if you see a leaf roll on spicebush or sassafras, the leaf roll may have one of these butterfly caterpillars inside, waiting for dark to feed or hiding from birds. The only problem is spiders have figured out their defense mechanism, and you may uncurl a leaf fold to find a spider looking very self-satisfied and not very hungry anymore. Wonderful plant, native shrub, buttonbush. If you have an area that doesn't drain well, plant a buttonbush. It's a good plant to include if you're creating a water garden. There are buttonbush plants that have been at Great Dismal Swamp, never seeing dry land, and have been there for, who knows, 100 years. It's long lived. My only complaint about buttonbush is that it doesn't stay in bloom as long as I'd like. But those Sputnik-shaped flowers are going to bring in butterflies, moths, bees, wasps, hummers. Everybody likes buttonbush. And it can solve some of your drainage problems in your garden. So there you have my ideas, and I welcome any questions. Remember that a lot of our pollinators are endangered, but endangered means we still have time to do something about it. Extinction would mean gone forever. So thank you again for coming tonight, and I welcome any questions I can answer. While I wait for Stacy to come back on, I'm showing you the ad for the spring plant sale. Many of the plants I've mentioned tonight are going to be part of the spring plant sale. So I encourage you to take a screenshot or take a picture with your cell phone so you don't forget about the spring plant sale. Okay, Stacy, you're on.
All right, I'm here. So while we do Q&A, we are going to put up our poll so that you can provide us with some feedback on this talk tonight, especially this section about what you'd like to hear about in the future. As we are actively planning for next year, your input on that is incredibly helpful. Okay, so there are some questions in the chat.
All right.
Does using insecticidal soap or horticultural oil on milkweed harm the eggs or caterpillars?
Not to my knowledge. I think it would depend on how unintrusively they have been applied.
All right, and then there's a comment saying that most commercially available native bee shelters are not suitable. The tubes need to be 5 to 6 inches long, and most of the houses offered for sale are too shallow. So just something for people to keep in mind. Next question. The Elizabeth River Project gave me some white clover seeds, but I read they are native to Europe and Asia. Is there a native alternative to white clover?
I don't know of any, but I overseeded with white clover years ago, and it's one thing I've been able to try and keep rabbits out of my garden with. If I can keep them on the lawn area eating white clover, maybe they'll leave the rest of my garden plants alone.
All right, that's all the questions that I'm seeing right now. If anybody has others, we've still got time to stick them in or come off of mute, and you're welcome to ask them yourselves.
Hello, Stacy.
Yes.
This is Sherry, and this is just a comment directed to Ruth. I really appreciate your mentioning Heather Home. I recently got to hear her speak, and I bought that book you showed, and it is the best pollinator reference book I have ever seen. She lists plant by plant and the pollinators and beneficial insects you will see on that plant. So thank you for giving her a heads up.
Oh, I'm happy to share the information. I'm glad you endorsed her. Thanks, Sherry.
All right, and we've had a couple more questions come in. Do you cut back your crossvine from time to time?
Only to keep it from impeding opening the doors to my shed. I tuck it in and under, and I don't really prune it. I don't cut it back much.
Okay. Are there any non-native plants we should stay away from?
Everybody talks about loose strife, purple loose strife because of the encroachment in the waterways. I would stay away from some of the fall blooming clematis, which I have found to be invasive. Whether it's a native or not, I find it invasive and not aggressive like most well-behaved natives should be. I just have a lot of trouble with that one. Non-natives to stay away from. A lot of people have opinions about butterfly bush. I have not found butterfly bush to be invasive at all. It's a wonderful pollinator plant. And if you mulch and tend your garden, you shouldn't have any aggressiveness from or invasiveness from butterfly bush. I would avoid plants that don't seem to attract any pollinators. One of the things I did when I was first getting started in gardening, I would go hang out at the nurseries and the garden centers and even at the big box store. Just hang out for a while and see what plants the butterflies and the insects go to. Or if you take a walk at Botanical Garden, look and see where the bugs go. And if the bugs are going to go there, that's something I want in my yard, whether it's native or non-native. So as a novice gardener, that's one of the tricks I use to get started.
Okay. Is there a list of book resources for us to refer to in the future? And I'll answer that. We are going to post Ruth's list along with the recording on bbmg.org. And then what about bee balm and yarrow in this area?
Both worthy. Any of the bee balms are great in the garden. And yarrow is just a natural pollinator attractor. One thing about your list question, the handout I prepared that Stacy is going to post on the website has the plants that I listed or the plants that were shown, and it also includes some interesting videos to watch on YouTube and the book titles and some websites that'll get you to some great information. Included in those websites that'll have lists of plants, the Butterfly Society website, the Virginia Native Plant Society website, the Xerces Society website. Any of those are going to be a great start for you. And I guess I could put my email address on there, or you could shoot me questions with the link on vbmg.org to the help desk. That's probably the easiest thing to do. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to send your question to the help desk.
All right, we have a few more in the chat. Are the plants mentioned easy to find locally? And the person asking says they are on the peninsula. Also, thank you for the informative talk.
No, you're very welcome. I encourage you to to make a point of finding out all the Master Gardener plant sales. You see the plant sale for VBMG, but Chesapeake has a plant sale, and Portsmouth has a plant sale up on the peninsula. I'm not sure who it is, Newport News, Hampton. There is a native plant or a Master Gardener chapter up on the peninsula, and I'm sure they have a plant sale. Look on the Virginia Native Plant Society website to see what plant sales they're announcing. Other than that, the nurseries, the commercial nurseries are starting to carry more and more natives, but you're going to find your best prices at a non-commercial plant sale. The drawback is that there's no guarantee, like a McDonald's or a commercial nursery are going to be able to offer you, but you will be able to you'll be able to find them. Just your best price is going to be with somebody who's not trying to make a living and pay employees.
And there was also in the comments I mentioned that the Virginia Living Museum has a native plant sale.
Thank you.
And I would add that Norfolk Botanic Garden also has a sale.
They do, and their sale is coming up soon. You can make inquiry at the Norfolk Botanical Garden website.
And then there was also a question asking if you had any recommendations for ground covers.
Well, that Erigeron pucellus Lynnhaven carpet is considered a ground cover. There's a winterberry, I believe. Stacy, you could probably help me with that question.
So some of the native ground covers that I use, I'm particularly fond of Carex, which do host several pollinators, but they don't get a lot of attention for that. But Carex make great ground covers, and there are types for sun and shade and wet and dry. Also the green and gold, the botanical name is escaping me right now. Chrysogonum virginiana, which is a spring bloomer with small yellow flowers. And I like the Carolina pinks, which I think was the first plant that Ruth showed, the wild
Silene virginiana.
Yes, those are one of my favorite ground covers, and they do better with some shade rather than full sun. Okay, so there's one more question has popped up. All right, I'm trying to learn to garden. So far, I have managed to keep knockout roses and succulents alive. What is something easy for a true beginner like me?
Well, take heart and know that I learned in Master Gardener class that if you haven't killed a plant 3 times, you're not a gardener. So killing plants is part of learning, and it's all part of being a gardener. And easy plants, you can't go wrong with black-eyed Susan, the Rudbeckia species. You can't go wrong with what's another easy one? Daisies are easy. And whether you go for a Montauk daisy or a Shasta daisy, they're easy. One of the plants I didn't mention in the talk tonight is a non-native Common name is red hot poker. Nithophia, I love the name, just it's fun to say. Nithophia is a wonderful plant for hummingbirds and the larger butterflies. And I haven't managed to kill one yet. What else would be easy?
Zinnias are also very easy.
Whose?
Zinnia.
Oh, zinnia, of course. Buy one packet of zinnia seeds and you've got a pollinator garden. The favorite of one of my mentors who was at Narvik Botanical Gardens, she thinks Cut and Come Again is one of the best varieties. I have not found a variety of zinnias that didn't attract pollinators. Granted, it's an annual, but it's a worthy one. What else? I've had great luck growing the native oak leaf hydrangea. It's a shrub. Haven't managed to kill one of those yet. I'm looking around my garden, which I haven't been spending a whole lot of time in yet this year, so I can't remember things. Anybody else have any ideas to share in the chat box for easy plants for beginners?
Let's see. Someone has offered mountain mint and garlic chives are easy.
Right, they were in the program.
Yep. All right, they're people are contributing. So the next question, are there any other large flowering bushes or trees native to the area I can plant at the edge of our brackish tidal swamp?
Buttonbush. What else? Some of the willows. I have, it's not a flowering shrub though. You know what did well in my yard for a long time was Clerodendron bungii. That's not the peanut butter tree, but it's the one that has sort of an upside down bowl shaped flower. Clerodendron bungii tolerated brackish water until the one hurricane where my yard flooded for days with very salt water, very high density saline in the brackish water. Other than that, you know what does well at the edge of the marsh here is canna lily. And canna, while it does attract that horrible leaf rolling moth, it also is a host plant for a Brazilian skipper. It's called the Brazilian skipper, and it hosts on the leaves of canna lily. They're tough plants.
I would add, if you're thinking specifically of shrubs and small trees, saltbush is a good one for brackish areas, as well as one of the hollies. I'm thinking of it. The inkberry hollies.
And I am trying to see the chat box. I can't find the chat box. Oh, there it is. Pickerel weed. That's interesting. I don't know that pickerel weed tolerates brackish, though. I have been unsuccessful in growing pickerel weed here. Obedient plant. That's a great plant. And I have no experience with camellias.
I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. They have an entire page for brackish and salt marsh plants on their website.
Seems like things are slowing down. Let me thank everyone again for your time and attention. And I certainly wish you good luck in helping to nurture our native bees and all pollinators.